Tears of the Kingdom is a pretty phenomenal game. From ageless graphics to gameplay that'll give you an endless sense of freedom in your creativity and exploration, it's a joy from start to finish. But it shares an issue with Breath of the Wild that hinders much of the story. Now, contrary to what you might think if you've seen the thumbnails for some, well, all of my past videos on Tears of the Kingdom, I don't believe the stories in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are awful. They're mediocre at best, but they aren't awful. However, due to the way they're presented in these games, they appear much worse. Now, before we get into the video, if you've enjoyed or even loved Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom stories, I'm not trying to tell you off or say that you're wrong. Games are subjective experiences, and the way I felt while playing doesn't necessarily have to be the same way you felt. Now, with that out of the way, I had some serious issues with Tears of the Kingdom's memories, so let's get down into it. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom have chosen to tell their stories in completely non-linear flashback methods. This allows the player to practically ignore the entire story for the most part, and in Breath of the Wild, you can go the entire game hardly knowing the existence of the champions or Zelda's powers or the Master Sword, and it was designed that way. If I can just give a short breakdown of Breath of the Wild's story, it goes like this. 100 years ago, there was a princess with the power to destroy a massive evil prophesied to return soon. Alongside the princess in this prophecy of evil that is Calamity Ganon, it also told of 4 divine beasts and 4 champions who would pilot said beasts, who, together, could destroy Calamity Ganon. After many attempts, Zelda, in a final desperate plea, would come to the Spring of Power to attempt, without success, in activating her dormant power. After she failed to do so, she began her way back to the castle, until Calamity Ganon appeared. It instantly caused devastation across Hyrule and even took control of the Divine Beasts and other constructs, easily overpowering Hyrule's forces, killing the champions and mortally wounding Link, who was only saved by Zelda finally managing to activate her power as Link was about to be killed by several guardians. Link was placed into the Shrine of Resurrection to be healed of his wounds. However, his memories of the battle 100 years ago were completely faded. Now we enter the part of the story you actually play. You see, up to this point, all of that was in forms of memories, complete with zero interaction from the player. Practically a glorified movie, chopped up into 13 little pieces. Whether or not you watch them all, the story up to the end isn't changed. This is the first massive issue when it comes to the memory style of storytelling in video games. It removes the once necessary component in video games, interactivity. The whole reason someone would choose to play video games over watching a movie is the interactivity you're given in video games. There's a reason video games often fail when it comes to movie adaptations, and why many movies fail as video games, and that's because they're 2 different forms of consumption. In games, you're always given a choice, whether or not you want to explore this building or not, whether you want to take a certain challenge or accept a quest or not. Open world games have only made that more possible. Films are the complete opposite, however. You don't get to decide who lives or dies. You can't choose what a protagonist does. You can't change the movie, and that's because that's how the movies are made. They'll always start the same. They'll always end the same, unless they're Clue. But in 99% of all movie cases, you will watch the same movie every time, and there's nothing wrong with that. But now, if we look back at the video game Breath of the Wild, having much of the story take place 100 years ago in chopped up pieces of a movie that you can watch in any order, it makes the story feel completely separate from the game. Like I said, you don't need to watch the memories. If you complete all the Divine Beasts, you'll only have to watch those 4 champion cutscenes, those of which aren't even integral to the story told from the memories. Video games thrive from user input, and that's only possible by them. And I suppose choose your own adventure books. By cutting out the player choice in half of the story, it makes them care less for that aspect of the game because, well, it already happened. Why should I care? And that's something that made Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity so great, because we finally got to experience in real time and take part in the Calamity 100 years ago, rather than view it through binoculars. After Link's 100-year nap time, there is still more story, however. From there, we follow Link as he regains his memories and frees the 4 Divine Beasts. We aid the 4 regions of the map in their different ailments, and eventually we become strong enough to face Calamity Ganon and destroy him once and for all. This section of the story still tells us unique information that wasn't told from the memories, such as the new champions and some of the reconstructions of Hyrule. However, if you've played either Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, you should understand what I mean when I say these 2 stories run parallel to one another. What I mean by that is that these 2 games are telling 2 different stories that never truly interact with one another. But without one story, the other is lacking in many ways. If you play Breath of the Wild without collecting the memories, you'll have no care for Zelda or how she's trapped in Hyrule Castle holding Ganon back. If anything, you'd care more for the champions, but since they're already dead, why bother? Or if you only watch the memories, you'd be more likely to go help Zelda right away with zero care for the champions. Or more realistically, you'd do both, but without necessarily having a complete understanding of either, by not getting all memories, or only completing some champions, or reading some diaries. These stories are made to complement one another, but in execution, one is drawn out without substance, and the other is a movie that feels like someone's cutting pieces out of it. Now, as great as Breath of the Wild's story could have been, there's one story that will always surpass Breath of the Wild, and maybe even Tears of the Kingdom if you help it, and that's the story of you subscribing to my channel. After all, it's free, and you won't have to spend $70 on it, and you won't have to spend $20 on the DLC that is hitting the notification bell, so you won't miss out on any of the new awesome Nintendo content. But with that, we need to look at Tears of the Kingdom specifically, and see how its use of memories worked far less than in Breath of the Wild. Without major spoilers, Tears of the Kingdom again had its story cut in two, with half of it taking place during memories from Zelda's perspective at the beginning of the Imprisoning War, and in the present following Link as he fixes the 4 major areas of Hyrule, and recruits the sages to help destroy Ganondorf. The first major issue with the memories here is how they chose to structure them differently than Breath of the Wild. I would say, unlike Breath of the Wild, the memories of Tears of the Kingdom have much more girth and story prevalence than Breath of the Wild, and that sounds like a good thing, but in Breath of the Wild, each memory only told small bits about Zelda herself, and was used more to show us Zelda's growth as a character. In Tears of the Kingdom, however, the story is much more linear in nature, having each memory progress the plot in big ways, introducing completely new information for the game, or answering questions from past memories. It tells this linear narrative, which I would be perfectly fine with, if not prefer, except while doing so, still allows you to see it in any order. This works fine in Breath of the Wild, as I said, because each memory wasn't revealing huge information, rather just insight into a character. However, in Tears of the Kingdom, if you aren't careful to watch the memories in order, you could find out huge plot twists of the game before you even learn what a Zonai is. To be fair, I still don't know what a Zonai is, but that's not the memory's faults. Breath of the Wild's memories are if you took an illumination film and cut it up into pieces. If you watch the pieces out of order, you'll still understand it. Tears of the Kingdom's memories are if you took a Christopher Nolan film and cut it up. If you accidentally watch the 7th piece before the 4th, you'll have absolutely no clue what's going on. The whole memory issue is compounded by Tears of the Kingdom's improved and emphasis on its playable story. While Zelda is in the past drinking tea and talking with goats, Link is fighting snowstorms and undead creatures like it's no one's business, and it's badass as hell. However, whenever we go back to the old sages or the memories, it all feels pointless. Many very smart people in my comment section have raised the point that the game's story could have been far better if it was Link who traveled back in time, and not Zelda, and I couldn't agree more. They wouldn't have to change that much either. They could keep the deaths and the Sky Islands with a simple solution saying that it was covered up or disappeared by the time of Breath of the Wild. And the only thing they would have to do different is changing the towns and people, unless they wanted to send them back in time too. Breath of the Wild was excusable in the story, happening 100 years ago, but from the execution of the memories and the more involved storytelling in Tears of the Kingdom, there was no reason the story didn't have us going back to the beginning of Hyrule to organize the 7 sages, and saving the 4 ancient races of Hyrule from their own ailments. There's nothing in the Making Open World Games for Dummies book that tells you have to make a 100% open story. You can tell stories in bits and pieces, and still have it come all together in the end. And unfortunately, I don't believe Tears of the Kingdom succeeded in that. But if you disagree, tell us Tears of the Kingdom haters why, but keep it civil, because while I'm harsh on Tears of the Kingdom's story, it's because I really do love this game in Breath of the Wild, and I was just expecting so much more from Nintendo, and there was no reason they couldn't succeed. So I hope for our shouting to the heavens to allow future Zeldas to be improved. But with that, always keep cool. Bye!